at least every 2 people have 1 sheet of paper and markers. And I know that some of us walked in now, but if you can try to be in collaboration with someone you do not know, that would be very beneficial. So my name is Manar Hussein, and thank you so much, Qasim, for the introduction. I've been a K through 12 teacher most of my life, and I have been in academia also. And I'm at a point where I've studied and I've read a lot, and now I feel like more than ever we're in a time period when we need more action. But the reality is our action has to be informed, and so we cannot divorce ourselves from theory. And so we try to really collaborate in any of our work, which is why I came to the PAC, is to make sure that I apply my theory to community programming. And so the first activity that we're gonna do, I'm a teacher, so I'm gonna call on people. I don't want to, so I really hope you volunteer. But we're gonna have 2 quotes, and then while someone reads those quotes, I want everybody to share the construction paper. And I want you to draw your 2 journeys to education, your professional journey and your personal journey. And I'm gonna give you a really quick example of those 2 tracks. My professional or my educational journey through schooling, I was an ESL student before they renamed it ELL. I went to predominantly white schools most of my life until I went to Atlantic City High School, which is a predominantly black school. And then I had a culture shock when I went to college. This informed how I became an educator, whether it be me seeing people experience racism or any type of marginalization. It has definitely informed my practice. Hi, Tamim.
Where's my mom?
She's right here. Guys, I'm presenting. It's okay. And so, that's my professional track, right? That's the educational institutions that I went through. But my personal track is that I actually come from a family of teachers. I swore up and down my whole entire life, I'm not gonna be like my parents who were teachers, my 3 sisters that are in education, and I said, no, I'm gonna be an activist until I realized being an activist isn't a real job that I can just apply to. And I wanted to move out and pay for rent. So I was like, how can I get the information there out to people? I did a master's in education. So my personal life and even my grandparents from my dad's side were both teachers and educators. And whether I consciously knew it or not, it definitely impacted how I view teachers and education. It was a non-negotiable in my life that this was really important, and especially for my parents, they were like, college is a non-negotiable, and that your education, nobody can, your knowledge and your education, nobody can take that away from you. So that's my personal track. So I want you to think of those 2 tracks, and with some words, but I would like you to draw as much as possible. I'm not asking for masterpieces. They can be doodles. They can be abstract. But I want you to draw while we read the next 2 quotes. Can I have a volunteer for the first quote? Rola?
They stole our land, so we reclaimed it with words. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. Hassan Kanafani, a teacher himself, saw storytelling and education as tools to preserve Palestinian identity.
Thank you. You could tell your teacher. And second quote.
A balanced curriculum that equates colonizer and colonized is not balance. It is complicity from the BDS movement guidelines for academic boycott.
So I want you to think of these 2 quotes, because I don't want you to necessarily try to be apolitical when you're speaking about your journeys or when you're drawing about your journeys. I want you to truly think of your entire being and your entire identity. And you can start, and I will give you about 4 minutes. I will also include a countdown.
I'm gonna get myself back.
What's like the whole conflict? Professional journey Yeah, or like rather to that does something obviously like
Okay, so we're gonna come back together. I know it's not enough time. Honestly, that's the most difficult part of teaching is there's never enough time. But you can return to your drawings throughout. If that helps you, while we're talking or focusing, you can definitely add to your drawing. I first introduced this activity as a collaboration between two people. How many people combined their journeys or talked about each other's journeys or how they might have influenced each other? There's no shame in the game. Kind of set you up on purpose. How many people, their journeys interacted with each other?
I tried to separate them, but they kind of overlap.
Okay, do you guys mind sharing?
I guess I drew like a camera on one side of professional and but like an eye on the other side of like personal and stuff because a lot of like my education was just what I saw and what I was able to see, and when I became more professional I wanted to share what I saw with other people and my experiences, so I started using a camera and I'm a filmmaker now. So I kind of feel like they both kind of were just about seeing things and capturing it in different ways. And when I was younger, I used to like dictate stories to my mother and have her like write them down to kind of document. And so I kind of carried that on into like professional, wanting to share stories and share like my experiences.
Awesome. Do you want to share your section?
I learned how to read when I was 4 and kept on reading ever since. And I had an aunt who was a first grade teacher, and I decided the most cool thing in the world would be to teach little kids how to read. And so I became a first grade teacher, and then I decided it would be really interesting to teach teachers how to teach kids how to read, and so I moved on to that.
Awesome, thank you. Ryan?
Not really in education, but I guess an outlet that I found that helped me through all this was through PAC. Well, first through PAC, it was definitely very clear to me, but then as a freshman in college, definitely joining an SJP and then using that as an outlet to educate others on Palestine. So that's how I started.
You are in education. Everyone's always in education. Forever. Whether you like it or not, you're a student of life. Okay? But education kind of impacts us, right? Like, you have personal experiences that led you to SJP. So kind of what we're going to talk about today is the idea that your epistemology, and we're going to go over this, but your mind and your knowledge does not only come from academia and institutions, but it also comes from a personal life and your personal experiences. And it's also the interaction with others. Therefore, if you interacted with people that might have marginalized you, that will definitely impact your educational journey, and vice versa. If you experienced inclusion, that might also impact your educational journey. And when we talk about educational journey, again, it's not just within the academic setting, but a lifelong student of life. So the first step is we must turn to scholars that are from post-colonial studies, critical theory and decolonial thought, and they wrote about how colonization shaped knowledge production. How we produce knowledge, how we talk about things, is definitely impacted by history, including how we were colonized or how we exist in a colonized country. Whether we like to say it or not, the United States is a settler state. We are all settlers on a state that used the genocide of natives and the enslavement of Africans to start this nation. Now, a lot of people will fight lately and say, well, I'm an American. I'm pro-Palestine. But they will kind of forget that there's also a settler fight here in the United States that natives are still fighting for their land back. And so this post-colonial / critical theory is really critiquing the way we see Eurocentric epistemologies. And so what are epistemologies? It's a branch of philosophy that is the focuses on the theory of knowledge and how we interact with knowledge. So the first thing is the nature of knowledge. What does it mean to know something? And sometimes as educators or as students, we always talk about an education gap. And we say, well, if you're from an inner city school, you have an education gap. When in reality, you simply have a different education. You still know something. It might not be what your school wants you to know, but you still have some sort of knowledge. Or when we say ELL students have an education gap, in reality, they're bilingual students that have a knowledge like language that is incorporated. But in a Eurocentric mindset, we simply see if they do not know English, that means they have a gap. And so that's the nature of knowledge. And then there's the origin of knowledge, which, how is this knowledge acquired? We can get knowledge through reason, experience, intuition, and testimony. And we're going to talk a lot about this, especially concerning the Palestinian experience and what we use as testimony or reason when we try to advocate for Palestinians. And sometimes we lean into the Eurocentric mindset of using Eurocentric voices that defend Palestinians over actually centering Palestinian voices. And that would be the perfect example of the origin of knowledge that we share. Sometimes people will say, well, maybe they will listen to this organization or Oxfam, or they will listen to the United States government, or they will listen to the New York Times, but they won't repost a journalist from Gaza because they will say, well, maybe people won't believe them. Maybe they don't look as professional. They're not a big newspaper, right? And so that's the origin of knowledge. And then there's the limits of knowledge, what we truly know and what is beyond human understanding. This can appear in two ways. Sometimes every single generation believes our science is what it is, and then the next generation, we're like, maybe letting babies cry it out is not the best method, right? And so the idea is that we should know we have a limit to our knowledge, and with time and progress, things will definitely change because our knowledge expansion will keep expanding. And then the validity of knowledge, which we will also discuss, where we say what belief is true and what is not. And so we see this a lot with our current government, where a lot of what they pass down for what they want to be the center of the educational institution, they do want a certain type of education to be as the right truth, and they invalidate all other truths. When in reality, every single one of us, even if we're from the same religion, even if we're from the same ethnic background, we will still have different truths. And our knowledges will also be different. Next slide. So when we construct our knowledge and we want to defend our people, or we want to have a decolonial education, we do have to start with the basics. And this is something that I'm very, very passionate about, is that I'm a little anti-AI and Spark Notes. Sometimes you do have to go back to the original text, because there are nuances and details from each generation that will inform our knowledge. So I have a few texts and recommendations throughout this presentation. And the first one I highly recommend is Orientalism. So Edward Said is like the father of post-colonial studies. And a lot of people quote him, but don't read him. Okay, they get the fancy quotes, but they don't actually read the book. And so can someone read this quote? Don't make me call on you. Bayan. Oh, okay, go ahead, Emma.
Orient was not and is not a free subject of thought or action. It was and is rather an idea that has a history and a tradition of thought, imagery, and vocabulary that has given it reality and presence in and for the West.
Can anyone tell me what this means? Or what they think there's no wrong answers. This is what working with theory is. You got to struggle with it.
Well, the idea of like the Orient as like a Far East is more a construct of the Western mind than it is an actuality of that region or its history.
Yes. Can someone give me an example? How does the West create a history and a tradition and imagery of the Orient that we see in everyday life?
For example, in the Middle East, like they create, like when they go and colonize, they change the history to fit the like Western perspective that they want to create about what's going on in the Middle East, so that people can have a specific image about it.
Yes, but I want a specific example,
Oh,
like an
okay.
outright specific example. You're absolutely right. That was on my other slide.
I was opening the floor for others.
Okay, I was like, you took my other slide. Yes, and then yes, and then yes.
Maybe the Western concept or view of Muslims and Arabs as uncivilized people, as nomads, not having the ability to create great civilizations and have profound histories, both in government, perhaps culture, and sciences, not to mention math.
Yes. So I'll emphasize the nomadic part, or seeing a nomadic life as automatically backwards. Seeing Bedouins as automatically uncivilized simply because they choose a different epistemology of knowledge, a way of life, and their knowledge informs their life differently. Yes? Do you have an example?
Yeah, a specific example would be 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
It's used as that event to start, like the war in the Middle East, and it literally changed how Americans viewed all brown people of every identity.
Yeah, like I think very personal experiences of how our religion was viewed. Growing up, how you might be perceived.
Definitely. Absolutely. We know that Muslims were demonized, and we know that the religion of Islam was demonized, that even the retaliation to it impacted even non-Muslims. Anyone that was perceived as brown or Muslim, it had a ripple effect on communities. Yes?
I was going to say as an example, like the Orient, or like an Oriental woman would be someone who is submissive, someone who's quiet, someone who is, like subordinated, versus like an Oriental man being perceived as like someone full of rage, someone full of like dominance. So like those kind of like not only stereotypes but instillment of caricatures.
Yes. So a perfect example of that anger is that sometimes people will actually use calmer sources out of Gaza because they say, they should be more perceived. People will understand them better if they're not as angry. When in reality, do they have the right to be angry? Absolutely. And we know that in other contexts or Western contexts, if a man is angry, he's seen as strong. If it was a white man that's angry, he's seen as strong and he's seen as powerful, and he says it like it is. But if it's an Arab man, he's angry, he's violent, he has no right to that anger. Last one.
There's also the version of Orientalism that's like, it's more palatable, right? Like, is it from the perception of exoticism, right? Appropriation, perfect example of that is like jazz from Aladdin, like belly dancing, spices, when anything outside of that is just so hard to perceive.
Yes. I could go on to that, but my presentations are. All right, and then the next recommended reading is Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon. And it really emphasizes colonialism's psychological and epistemic violence. And we're going back to this word epistemology and epistemic violence because that's where the core of everything that everyone mentioned, it is from the core of changing knowledge and the way we interact with knowledge. And so he talks a lot about how this epistemic violence erases history actively, but also rewrites that knowledge. And we see this very commonly with the Palestine, Palestine being erased and even being called Israel, right? That within itself is a form of erasure. And so, Bayan, can you read this?
Colonialism is not satisfied merely with holding a people in its grip and emptying the native's brain of all form and content. By a kind of perverted logic, it turns to the past of the oppressed people and distorts, disfigures, and destroys it.
And so, how can we see this in action today? Yes?
I forget what year it was, but the Miss Universe contestant from Israel that wore tatris and claimed it as her own. It's like rewriting the historic narrative.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another example that focuses on the psychological colonization.
Kind of saying that Palestine has never existed before, and it's
You're literally taking all my slides. Literally, but it's okay. That's good. But yes, saying that it actually never existed before, man.
I guess this is the same, not even calling Palestinians, calling them Arabs.
Yes. And so we even sometimes participate in this, right? Subconsciously. And I've even done it when I'm posting about what's happening in Gaza and I keep saying Gazans, not Palestinians. But the reality is all of it is Palestine and they're all Palestinians. But if I keep saying the people from Gaza, then it kind of isolates them from the rest of the colonial project that is taking over Palestine. And so even though the intention might not have been to erase a people, it is a psychological thing that I absorbed even with just interaction. Does that make sense? Okay, next slide. So, examples of colonial narratives, and then we're going to go on to the Palestine ones. So these are really, really important because nothing in our history is in isolation. And when we understand the context of the settler-colonial state in the United States, we will understand that Nazism is not a German thing, that it was adopted from the genocide and the enslavement and genocide of Africans and natives. And when we realize that people say Israel controls the United States, if we actually look at the history of the United States, we realize that Israel is actually a colonial outpost of the United States. The United States recreated their project in the Middle East for colonial reasons. You want to read the first one?
Yeah. The discovery myth narrative. Columbus discovered America in 1492. Reality. Indigenous peoples had lived in the Americas for millennia. The framing of discovery justifies land theft and genocide. Example, U.S. and Latin American textbooks often depict Columbus as a heroic explorer, ignoring the enslavement and violence against native peoples.
Next one. Don't make me call on you. We made eye contact.
Australia, Canada, and the Americas were empty, uncivilized lands before European arrival. In reality, these lands were home to complex societies with advanced agriculture, governance, and science. Example, Australian schools once taught that Aboriginal peoples were primitive, ignoring 65,000 plus years of continuous culture.
And the last one, the civilizing mission. Oh, no, behind you.
The civilizing mission narrative Europeans brought progress, education, and modernity to backward societies. Reality, colonial education systems, example, Indian residential schools, African missionary schools sought to erase indigenous languages and cultures. Example, British colonial curricula in India taught English literature while suppressing Sanskrit, Persian, and local knowledge systems.
Next slide. So before I move on, one of my favorite tweets that I saw, I still call it Twitter, personal reasons, but one of my favorite tweets was, when people talk about diaspora wars and how people are always colonized people are always arguing with each other, and then somebody was like, well, we all argue in English anyway. And it is true, right? I'm teaching this in one of the most commonly used languages. And that's because, again, whether it's intentional or not, we have been colonized to believe that this is the most accessible language. And this is the language that we interact with. So this is how Zionism uses the discovery myth, and the same exact myths are repeated throughout history. Emma?
Okay. The narrative. Zionists discovered and made the Desert bloom in the neglected land. Modern Israel revived an ancient Jewish homeland after centuries of emptiness.
Yeah.
In reality, Palestine was a thriving society with cities, farms, and cultural institutions led by Muslims, Christians, and Jewish Palestinians long before Zionist colonialization. Example, early Zionist Israel Zangwill propagated the myth of a land without a people for a people without a land, erasing Palestinian existence.
Next one.
The empty land. Palestinians are not real people, nation. They are just Arabs with no real ties to the land. Reality. Palestinian society had distinct dialects, customs, and governance. The Ottoman era, Jerusalem, erects Palestinian Shibahim. Example, Israeli officials, e.g. Golda Meir, famously claimed there was no such thing as Palestine.
Meanwhile, her first passport literally was in Palestine. So I don't know who she's lying to, but herself. And then last one.
The civilizing mission. Israel brought democracy, technology, and modernity to a primitive Arab world. Palestinians are violent, uncivilized, and need Israeli guidance. Reality, pre-1948 Palestine was not backward. It had thriving cities, Jaffa, Haifa, Jerusalem, universities, newspapers, women's rights movements, and trade networks. Example, Israel systematically destroys Palestinian institutions, schools, hospitals, and farms, while claiming to improve Palestinian lives.
And I really want to emphasize here that this narrative is still used, including by neighboring Arab countries that try to make decisions for Gaza. It's because they still do not acknowledge that Palestinians have agency to actually rule their own and have their own governance. And so this can also be exported. It's not exclusive to the West. The West already treats Palestinians that way, but it gets exported when Palestinians are seen as the problem, and therefore for other people to not defend them, they start saying, well, we can intervene by building. Or Jordan saying, we can remove a resistance movement from Gaza, and then, they will be able to live. And so this is very much exported and imported through different borders. And why do we need to compare narratives across time and space? Like we talked about India, Australia, South, North America. Why should we compare these narratives? Yes?
To make projections based off of past outcomes, where things may end up being based off of previous points in history that parallel what we see today.
Okay. What else? Bayan, and then you.
Because they're all the same. It's like obviously there's different peoples involved and different countries involved and different players and I guess details involved, but when you look at it from the outset, it's pretty much just the same playbook, like what it is they're doing, how they accomplish it, and then what's the end goal.
Yes.
And then preserve certain histories as well, because sometimes the point of a lie, especially one that matches the truth, is to cover over the histories which exist there that are being repressed.
Yes.
Yeah. Also, one form of colonization can often justify another, in the sense that, America was colonized by Europeans, and look, it's turned out to be a great democracy. So therefore, that's the Israelis or the Zionists are trying to do the same in Palestine.
Yes, I love that you brought up this point, because that's also why a lot of powers in Western countries uphold Israel, because if it gets held accountable, we would have to hold accountable a lot of colonial states that have been functioning in a lot of countries until today, this is the academic side. I don't believe it's post-colonial. I believe it's like rebranded colonial studies. But the idea is that neo-colonialism is a thing, and if we dismantle any system of oppression, we would have to be reflective of like what's happening in this country. Why are these countries occupying other, whether it be Kashmir, or seeing how a lot of African countries are still paying debt to France. And so it's a ripple effect that could really impact an apparatus of oppression across the globe. And which is why a lot of people believe that Palestine is at the forefront of colonial movements, is because it would cause a ripple effect of realization. I'm not going to go further because there is another workshop about solidarity, and I mean, it's really great. And so we see coloniality in education all the time, and it's our job to always resist it. Now, I know people sometimes get burned out. People sometimes think, well, I can't change a curriculum in my school, but everyone could do something. Even if you're not in an educational setting, you could do something. So a lot of what we see coloniality in language, literature, and science is that it's seen, everyone knows Shakespeare around the world, right? But not everyone reads Edward Said, even though he's one of the most famous, but compared to other, Western writers, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, they're not seen as valuable. We also exclude oral traditions. We had a program yesterday that was about Palestinian folklore, and a lot of the oral traditions, we have to have programs to preserve them because they're not seen as an important source of knowledge, even though some of those songs talk about the land and talk about the relationship Palestinians have with the land. And we also see this when a lot of the syllabi just exclude anything that's outside of the white Western, Eurocentric information. And then the linguistic is, and I love to tell this to my students sometimes, in college they really complain about professors with accents. And it's never the French guy, it's never the Spaniard. It'll be a Dominican, but not the Spaniard. But it will be someone from India or China. And that is a form of now, whether you might be like, but it's so hard to understand. We are all conditioned to think they are more difficult to understand because they do not belong in academia, or we see something as if this is not a place for them. And we also encourage students, I studied in Europe, but I did AmeriCorps in Nigeria, right? So we see a lot of Black and brown countries positioned as, I'm volunteering to help people, but if you're going to Europe, I'm being civilized and learning about culture. And so that's also a part of coloniality. When you encourage students to study abroad, you can tell people you can study abroad anywhere around the world. You don't have to go on like a mission trip or try to help people. You can simply just learn about the people because they have knowledge that's just as valuable as London, right? And then you also have, I'm running out of time, so I'm just gonna go comment on this, okay? Because this is actually one of my dissertation topics. Ibn Khaldun is the father of sociology. He traveled through North Africa all the way to Spain, and he's literally considered the first historian to actually record how tribalism impacts people, and Abyssinia is the name of his book, and everyone always credits Auguste, he's French, comment that he is the father of sociology. When in reality, you could literally read him and whoa, that was really, that was kind of smooth. Oh, I was like, that was kind of smooth. Usually I do fall. Yeah, right? Even though he and his contemporaries cite Ibn Khaldun, but he's never used as the example of father of sociology because he studied the North African countries, right? And so when we talk about indigenous people and we make fun of Mayan calendars, and we simply because we misunderstand them, right? And then the idea that there's a first world and third world, when people say that, I'm like, we're literally on the same globe. Like, we're on the same globe, right? Yes.
Just very quickly, I've been reading some of Ibn Khaldun, and not only is he the father of sociology, but also of economics.
Yes.
He was the first to introduce the idea of labor theory of value, for instance.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, don't get me started. Do not get me started. Yes, I could literally talk about Ibn Khaldun for like hours. He honestly was talking about racism and tribalism and the way systems work and so much before anyone, and it's recorded, and he has his books, and for some reason he's just kind of put as a footnote, when in reality all of those people after him actually studied him to come up with their theories. Thank you for that, but get me started.
Don't want to get you off on a tangent.
And then something that I also, for K through 12, or if you have a child at home, you gotta acknowledge that the maps exaggerate the size of Europe and North America compared to Africa and South America. And this is something I noticed as a child. I was like, there's no way Africa's that small. Like, I was like, there's just no way it's like New Jersey's half of Africa? Like, what? Like, that makes no sense. But this is actually what most school maps use. They use this form of mapping that, they emphasize North America and Europe. And another thing I teach my students is that throughout history, Europe was not Europe, it was Eurasia. It's the only continent that's actually not separated from any other continent. But over time, they were like, we're a little bit more whiter than you, so we're gonna be Europe and Eurasia. But in reality, they're attached. And that comes from a Eurocentric colonial mindset to say, we are different than you, and therefore, like when you think of Turkey and how it's literally split down the middle, and one side they call it Europe and the other side Asia, that comes from coloniality. That comes from valuing one side over the other. And so I wanted to use historical examples of Palestinian educational resistance because we have a lot of examples of today, but we forget that actually during the British Mandate, people always make it seem like it just started with Israel, like the resistance. But under Ottoman and British colonial rule, they actually did have a lot of Palestinian nationality. And this is now one of the oldest functioning universities. Al Najah School used to be a primary school, and they used to focus on being a hub for Palestinian culture and teaching little kids, and then it developed into a university, and it still exists till today. That was a form of educational resistance. And so Palestinians have this history. This is also another school, Rawdat al-Maruf, which means like the Garden of Knowledge, which I think is a really, really pretty name. But it also shows that Palestinians have this value of land and like knowledge and, just like the actual land is valuable. And it taught about Arab identity and resisting the British attempts to erase Palestinian history. So how can this be created in this context? In our context? Even if you can't start a whole school, how can we create this type of resistance? Yes? Book clubs. I'm going to plug in PAC programs, but...
I was going to say this.
Yeah. Yes. PAC programs for kids and adults. Like I said, we had a program last night about tatriz and folklore. And that is a form of educational resistance, but also our kids' programs, especially even during the summer, where they learn about Palestine and they get to practice their culture and their language. That is a form of educational resistance where you don't have to, change their whole entire schooling system, because sometimes we get hopeless when we think like we have to fight an entire bigger system. No, you can function out of it as well.
I'm going to plug in real quick. If anyone's interested, PAC also has Freedom is the Future for Adults.
Yes.
If you want to learn about Palestine. So keep an eye on the Instagram for whenever we really...
Probably
next this year.
Next winter, yeah. And then there's also education in exile. We have seen that Palestinian villages have set up schools and camps. something that's really undermined is that Palestinians over time have always valued education. Gaza had like a 98% literacy rate, and even with the blockade over the years, they still made that happen. And we're gonna watch actually a little video. And in Jenin, they had the Tree of Knowledge, which was an actual olive tree where they would just go under it and the elders would teach the kids. And so it's really reinforcing that if there's a will, there's a way for Palestinians, right? Next slide. And then another example was the Freedom Bus from Ramallah, and they actually would go, they were inspired by the US Civil Rights Movement, and they would go from city to city, and at a certain point, they would read so much on the bus that they kind of made it into a library, because Israel would literally limit what they could read, and so this was a way to transfer information from city to city while they were still, preserving the books. So this is a small documentary by someone I'm in contact with in Gaza, and on and off, honestly, I haven't seen her online in a while, but her and her sisters created these little movies about what they're doing to sustain their education as a form of resistance. Yes, please. Is it gonna play? Okay, perfect.
لما عشت في واقع كان كثير صعب إني أقدر أعطي بنتي اللي كنت أنا مرتبة لحياتي كيف كان شكل أمومتي معها. اتصعبت كثير صراحة إني أنا ألاقي حتى مصادر لا مكان يكون مخصص للطفل بالطريقة اللي أنا بدي إياها.
So how is that a form of education as a resistance? Because she's not a school teacher.
Preserving and diffusing that information.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, preserving and diffusing that information to people that can't access it.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to point out two ways that they're doing this. She even mentions that sometimes they have to burn paper, but they still value those books and they still try to, give that information out, whether it be, she mentions that mothers from even other countries send things to over certain apps, but she also wants to make sure that other people in Gaza get that information. And so I want us to really take that as a practice, okay? We live in a world that's very online, and we need to start making tangible copies if our world of epistemic knowledge is being threatened. Then we need to make sure we actually have tangible copies that we could later pass on. And I'm not, again, I know I always seem like I'm making a plug, but book fair, get the books, make copies. Copyrights don't but I'm just saying, if you can, because under those conditions, if international law doesn't matter, copyright law does not matter, right? Knowledge is what is the most important part, and they're not willing to stop it even during a genocide. So I have some of these Palestinian authors. Like I said before, something that I have fallen into is sometimes when I want an audience to listen to the Palestinian cause, I reference something more Western because I feel like, hey, if they see anti-Zionist Jewish organization saying that it's okay to help Palestinians, maybe they'll be more convinced. We shouldn't have to do that, right? We should not have to use an outsider to acknowledge the humanity and the reality of Palestinians. We should directly use Palestinians and what they are saying as our first sources of knowledge. And so these are some of my favorite authors that I highly recommend. I don't mind if you guys take pictures. I'm so sorry. Can I have 10 more? Okay, sorry. And then next slide. Stephen Salaita actually was a professor that got fired. He got fired 10 years ago when I was in college. And he got fired from his university for speaking about Palestine. And when we invited him to my college, he's not Muslim, and we got an email that we invited a Muslim terrorist, and we're like, you can't even get it right, bro. Like, he's not even Muslim, he's just Palestinian. He literally became a bus driver, and he says that he would never go back and change what he did, and that he would rather have a righteous job and to not go back and compromise. And I really want us to think of that as educators, but also in any type of job that we have, like that we ground ourselves that nothing is worth abiding by a genocide, right? Like it should never be a thing that you think to negotiate with. And then the other names are actually people on social media. We do have perfect victims being sold by the PAC, but also PM Press is selling them. And Mariam Barghouti is in the West Bank. She really talks a lot. A lot of these people speak in English, which again shows us that the knowledge is still being transferred in English because they're reaching out to people that they know have outside power. Bisan, I'm sure we're all familiar with. And Sakir Khadir, I really appreciate that he humanizes Palestinians from every perspective. So he does narrative work and photography work, and he interviews people that are part of the resistance. And he says, you know, some of these people, they had no choice but to have to want to defend their land. And he gets a lot of crap for it, but that is still knowledge, right? That is still something that informs what is happening, and it shouldn't be erased. These are other Palestinian sources that should be some of your first sources to go to. Decolonize Palestine is such a great source for college students. All of them, honestly, the Palestine Rights Festival is out of, and it's a literature festival that promotes Palestinian authors. And so these should be your first go-tos, rather than if you feel like people will listen to the New York Crimes. But you can also just go right to the source. Yes.
Also Democracy Now!
Yes. Oh, Amy Goodman.
Yes.
She's dope. And then visualizing Palestine. Something that I've seen a lot of people do, make photocopies of the little infographics. Put them everywhere. Make stickers out of them. It's really important for sometimes people to just get the information. And then my question is, how can we sustain these sources? Do not say donations, even though you should. But how could we sustain these sources? Yes? Oh, literally using them.
Or, like using them before you use anything else, like you said, like don't use like the New York Crimes. Like if somebody's asking you a question, you can like refer them to any of these before you would refer them to like Western news sources or Western like databases or anything.
Yes, and make copies. Always make copies of all the information. That's something like that is so essential in this day and age, considering the National Archive is even being rewritten in this country. So make copies, use them as the first source, and use them a lot. And that is a way to sustain them beyond just, you know, a monetary support. Yes? We're gonna move on from there. I'm gonna push this book. It's honestly such a good, concise read. And he gets to the point, he's unapologetic, and I think this is a Palestinian voice that kind of is so unapologetic that it shows us how we should be talked to by Palestinians. And so, do you mind reading?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But these claims are blind to their own ethnocentrism. There is no such thing as a universal rhetoric, behavior, and one state of being, or contoured by geographic, economic, and socio-political idiosyncrasies.
Yep.
This is not a case for Palestinian exceptionalism. On the contrary, I am echoing a basic aphorism. People are different in different places, and words mean different things. The word shaheed, martyr, for example, carries distinct subtexts depending on the context. Its connotations are passive and active, encompassing the victimized and the heroic. Whether a member of an Islamic, Christian, secular, or Marxist organization, whether targeted or untargeted, If we want to address the empire, we need to be fluent in its vernacular. But this expectation is asymmetrical. We are often admonished by critics who are illiterate or purport to be illiterate in our language.
Anyone, thoughts, responses, analysis?
Yeah, we have to educate ourselves a bunch to people who just will not do the basics.
Yes. So he emphasizes that, the word shaheed, and sometimes people say, well, Palestinians are celebrating that their kids are dying. They're calling them martyrs, but really in the cultural and religious and even beyond in religious context, that has a different meaning than when you say it in English. And he says we have to explain these things, but they don't even make the effort to understand those things. And so we have to learn English. We have to make things make sense to them, but sometimes they don't even bother, and they purposefully, he mentions whether it's unintentional or intentional, and therefore I believe as educators, and like I said, everyone is in education, you don't have to be a teacher, we have to actually fight that in our daily lives. And that means teaching the young the real meaning of words, and that context for different situations exist, and not just for Palestinian, because he says it's not exclusive to Palestinians, but if we see someone from a different culture or religion or background, we have to understand that they have a context that we might not understand, and it's not their obligation to always educate us. And then, so we are actually going to have the book club discussing this book June 10th. I know this was a long presentation. It was actually longer. I was like fighting with myself. But the whole entire part about solidarity and collective struggle, honestly, I highly recommend going to the 4:30 p.m. Track. Both of Zeli and Abir are amazing people that, I've been on panels with both, and they're really, really impactful. And embody what solidarity is. And this movement, like I said before, we learn through history and time and space. It's really important. And then I think that's gonna be it. Yeah. And so the last thing I want you to write on your papers is a commitment to how you're going to use education as a resistance, whether it be reading certain texts, or if you are going to be teaching something, just a one-sentence commitment to how you will use education as a form of resistance. It's homework, I'm collecting it.